Okay, assalamu alaikum and welcome everyone. I'm glad to introduce Dr. Anthony Newman as the presenter of this webinar. Anthony Newman has been a senior publisher with Elsevier for many years and is now Emeritus. He's based in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. He joined Elsevier over 36 years ago and has been a publisher for the last 26 of these years until he became Emeritus publisher in spring 2024. For the 10 years before then, he was the marketing communications manager for the biochemistry journal of Elsevier. By training, he is a polymer chemist and was active in industry before leaving London and moving to Amsterdam in 1987 to join Elsevier. Professor Newman has presented in excess of 1,000 various authors, reviewer, and ethics workshops over the past 18 years, both virtually and in person at universities, conferences, YouTube lectures, society gatherings, and in many parts of the world. The title of his today's talk is Scholarly Journals Publishing, Retraction of Scientific Articles Briefing Online Event. And he's going to talk for about 30 minutes. And after that, we will have a question and answer session. If you look at the toolbar of the Zoom, there is a Q&A button. Please use this anytime during the presentation to post your questions. The chat sometimes become distracting because of the pop-ups. So we are going to use Q&A for the questions. So Dr. Newman, the stage is all yours.
Well, fine, thank you. Firstly, thank you for the invitation and the kind description about me. So, as you heard, people, we're going to be talking about the unpleasant side of scientific publishing, the area of retractions. But all researchers and authors have to be very aware about this whole aspect because it can affect you and your career very much so. This is one of several ethics type workshops which gives you skills you need to have. Now, for some reason, that's better than that. So this is the area we're going to be focusing on. It's quite simple. What happens if authors experience rejections? How do you process it? What do you do, what you not do? What you got to be careful of? And also, most important thing is if you are involved in some sort of potential retraction, you must take action. You can't ignore it. It will not go away. Of course, originally, retractions were all about the idea of helping scientists when they had an oops moment after they published something. They found out that perhaps what they had published wasn't accurate, and some future experiment proved that. And so they went back and then they said, sorry, guys, we got to retract this because it really is not correct. And everyone says, okay, that's good. It protects the record of science. But there's more and more of these retractions have been coming along, and such that it's almost a whole, tidal wave of retractions and problems with scientific literature. And so the whole area of academia has had to get involved with knowing all about things that can go wrong with publishing and all the ethical problems around that. And an interesting thing about it also is retraction is not limited to a short period after you've published. It can be months or years later. Then if something gets found out and it's concerned about, whereby an article can be taken away and retracted and it's gone. And so from that point of view, it's a constant reminder that you've got to be always making sure there's nothing wrong with your work. And of course, everyone has to comply with international ethics and research practice. Local, national might be fine, but the reality is, if you have international ethical aspects which are more detailed, that is more superior than any national policy. So the retractions themselves, they get investigated by a whole interesting process. Most publishers are guided by a Committee on Publication Ethics. I'll talk about that a bit later. And And that gives guidelines and flowcharts and everything else. And so you can go online and see these and just see how a journal editor is guided as to if they find something that's not quite right that's been submitted or has been published and what to do about it. So the peer review process is supposed to find things that aren't quite right with papers. It also looks for unethical things with papers. And so apart from the peer review process, referees looking at your work, is it well written? Is it well described? Does all the various aspects of the paper add up? But it's also all the ethical aspects looked at as well. So is it unethical? Has it been done properly? Are there certain things not done properly? Is the management of the research process incorrect? Is it basically false? Has the main author added a whole bunch of co-authors just for some unusual reason? So all these various things can and do take place during the peer review process. And the authors know nothing about this until it actually happens. So a referee might flag something and then tell the editor, or our internal ethics tools will flag something and tell the editor, and then they decide what to do. So often what happens, though, is that if an editor finds something that's a bit dodgy, that's a bit unethical, they will probably not declare publicly that it's unethical. They'll just give you some other reason, like not novel enough or something, just to avoid a whole bunch of conflicts and discussions. And as a lead author, you've got a few co-authors, and there's reasons why they're there, of course. But if other co-authors suggesting other ones get added, that's almost like an alarm bell saying this is a bit dodgy, something going on here. It could affect your research, your manuscript that you're the main author on. So you really got to make sure that none of these problems are there in whatever you are sending in to journals. If you are accepted, great, after a revised paper, and it gets published, and then you can think, okay, it'll be seen, it'll be looked at, it'll be useful to the world, it'll be cited. Sometimes what happens is that manuscripts are looked at and various readers say, this is odd, this is strange. And then they flag things they're concerned about, the scientific content or figures being not quite right, and so on. Now, we do this similarity check with the Crossref database, but it does not cover all journals out there in the world, only about 65–70% of them. So if, for example, there are some articles published in other journals with an overlap, it would not be seen by our checking system only after it's published and someone looks at the article and says, I recognize that, that's mine. And then they tell the editor there's something going on here. So again, you've got to make sure that if you are publishing things, it doesn't have weird things in there, and that way it doesn't come around and bite you. Sometimes you have things that are really interesting. Bulk retractions, there have been all sorts of weird cases of journals where you have a whole bunch of articles being rejected or retracted all at once. And that's perhaps because of something unethical being found out about the peer review process, fake referees or whatever. You have sometimes false journals with almost or the same name as the real journal, but a different URL. And that's not nice, but it's been happening. Sometimes you have a great journal which was struggling financially, taken over by some other company, and then in effect it's then used as a Trojan horse to get everything in accepted for a fee. So these are things that are happening out there. It's not helpful, of course, it's all happening, but you as a scientist and an author have responsibility to make sure that you really do get your paper submitted to journals that are real and are going to publish your work without anything odd going on down the road. If you do publish somewhere and then all your work gets retracted for some reason, it's been out there, it's gone, it doesn't come back. And if you try and publish it again, it's called duplicate publishing. So you really are you're head over the head with this process. So make sure that if a journal looks too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. Make sure a journal is covered by Scopus or similar databases. Have a look at Google, make sure there's no weird things going on. Check Retraction Watch, they have lists of fake journals. And it's sort of the dark side of publishing. Sadly, we all got to be aware of this and are trying to avoid the shadows. Here's an example of bulk retractions. There was a bunch of people who were not reviewers. They were fake. And then they approved a whole bunch of papers. And then when Wiley found out that they retracted them all, and that was a bit messy. But remember, as I said, it's every paper you publish is in the record of science. It's great, it's wonderful. Whatever you do now stays up forever. It's wonderful. But everything that you put up there also stays up forever. So any retractions stay up forever as well, which does not really reflect well on your career prospects. So you really got to be super, super careful. If you are needing to do a retraction, and what you've got to do first is you can't just say, I retract. You've actually got to go to the journal and say, why? So normally, if an author, say, spots something wrong, they'll go to the journal editor and say, look, we've got a problem. I've researched it. The methods that we've used was a bit wrong, and it's so the conclusions of the paper are not totally right. If it's a small error, then they can decide to agree with you to publish a corrigendum, which means it just says it stays up, but a corrigendum means this happens to just cover the bit that's wrong in the paper, original paper. If it's a bit more than that, then the editor and the author agrees that you've actually got to do something about it, which means to retract it. And it doesn't go away. You've actually got to have this, it's permanently up, but it's then linked to this retraction notice. So the author has to ask the editor for permission to retract the paper, and then a suitable notice like here is placed in an original article link. Both the editor and the authors had to agree the retraction reason, the text. So you might want to make it rather sort of light and say something, but the editor has a say as well, and you actually have to agree this almost negotiation as to what you and all the co-authors have to agree. You as a lead author don't make the final decision. It's a combination of all the authors plus the editor making that decision. It gets difficult sometimes if it's a paper a few years ago and one of the authors was a postdoc and had disappeared. You've got to find, because they've left research or whatever, and you've got to try and find some way to make contact with everyone to make sure that everyone agrees about the retraction text. And as you can see here at the bottom corner, it says this article has been retracted at the request of the editor-in-chief, and then basically and why, and the corresponding author has requested as well, explaining why that there's actually a problem where one of the authors did something wrong. So you also have something that there's been so many retractions that you now have people researching all the retractions. So here's an interesting article. It was just a short while ago in the Journal of Infometrics, where they're looking at all the various retractions going on and error types, and if it's a difference between sort of author teams or certain scientific fields or whatever. And so it's so rampant a problem that there's now articles being written about it, which is rather odd, I think. Now, sometimes what happens is that the paper has been published and then the editor sees it and thinks, this is not good, something wrong with this. And so the editor goes to the author, normally with a concern, say, hi, I'm concerned about this problem, this paper, in that, can you explain to me why A, B, and C? And if the author says, well, actually, it's this, and then the editor might say, okay, fine. And if the author says something specifically and says, well, actually, this is this, and the editor says, no, it's not right. This is wrong. And so the editor says, sorry, but I think this is just not good enough for my journal. I'm suspicious of it. I regard it as unethical, and I want it to be retracted. And then the editor, in effect, is asking the author to agree to retract the paper. In effect, they're forcing them to, but they're asking them to. And then the two parties, meaning the authors and the editor, agree this retraction notice text. And then the phrasing is with the approval of both editor and author. So in effect, it has to go. It has to go, but the authors have got some way they can perhaps explain how it went wrong, and then apologize for any errors they hadn't spotted or something. So the phrasing here, the authors apologies for any confusion the paper will cause the readers. In other words, just saying, okay, we did it wrong. What you're also saying, in effect, we got caught. Now, if you're asked to retract something by an editor and you think, oh, forget that, it didn't happen. You do the ostrich syndrome, you're just a head in the sand, or never happened. If you don't reply to an editor, they get very annoyed, and rightly so. And so they normally send an email to all of the email addresses they have of the authors, co-authors, everyone, to say there's a problem. And then normally the corresponding author or more will then get back to the editor and then have a dialogue. If there's no discussion, if there's no interaction between this group of authors and the editor says, this is silly. They normally give a deadline. They'll say, look, okay, if you don't get back to me within 2 weeks, I'm going to retract it without you. It's called a hostile retraction. And so that's what they do. And so then it's up to the editor to decide what to say. So here, this one, for example, the authors are not responding to this retraction notice. In other words, out there in the wide world, everyone out there, everyone knows that these few authors did not respond to any concerns, and so therefore are super unethical. So if ever you get to a situation, the editor is asking you to have an input, do not think, oh, it'll go away. It will not go away. It never goes away. It might take 6 months before it does actually happen to have a retraction notice, but the reality is it has to be worked on. You've got to work with the editor, work out what they want, and work out what went wrong and how you can not do it in the future. Because in effect, you have the situation that you now have a retraction linked to your name, which means you've got to be super careful not to do anything again. Because if you get more retractions, what will happen then is that your credibility as a real researcher just plummets. So it's very important to take care of these things. Now, sometimes there's a situation where a journal thinks, well, it looks like it's wrong, but we're not sure it's wrong yet. But at the same time, they don't want readers reading the article using the research data that's in the article to help them in their research studies and then moving on. So they publish what's called an expression of concern in the journal. And that expression of concern is there. It's linked to the original article. So when you as a reader read the article, it says there's an expression of concern linked to this. You can then click through and find out why there might be a concern about this particular article. A concern about reliability, concern about a figure, concern about something. Now, after investigation, which can take a while, because sometimes you get forensics involved in terms of looking at the figures and so on, then the expression of concern can be lifted, taken away. In other words, the article is perfect, and it's no longer linked ever to that particular concern for the future. Or it can be left in place. In other words, they can't actually prove that it's wrong, but they're pretty sure it is wrong. Or it can be replaced by something a bit heavier, a retraction notice, because they've now find more information, and then they can then publish a suitable retraction notice. So expression of concern, think of it as a holding thing for a few weeks, a few months, until they decide whether to let it go, leave it in place as a sort of a warning bell for any reader, or replaced by a retraction notice. There's all sorts of useful resources out there for authors to look at, because the more you understand these things, the more you're likely to be able to avoid them. As I said earlier, that the COPE, Committee on Publication Ethics, has this set of flowcharts which everyone can see, and they're not secret. They're a way to make it easier for people to not do things wrong. So if, for example, you are being asked by an editor to do something about this concern of theirs, if you go and look at the COPE flowcharts, you'll find it's a very simple process. That the first step they have to do is ask all the authors and co-authors to explain their concern. Then when that is responded to, then they go back to the authors discussing what the suggestions of the authors were and what went wrong and so on. So again, it's very useful to have these printouts of these flowcharts if you need them. I hope you don't. There's something called Retraction Watch. Retraction Watch is a group of people getting together, and they also are looking at all sorts of retractions and the phrasing of retractions, and looking for patterns and all sorts of things. And you can just go to this and look at it. And some scientists, or even private individuals, just give donations to keep it running. It needs a small amount of money to keep going. And so they are always asking for a bit of donations here and there. But in effect, it's a way, it's an independent, outside of publishings, look at these retractions, why there are these retractions and what's going on. So for example, the talk that I gave last time round to its university, this was something I got in Retraction Watch that week, about why all sorts of things that have been going on. So it's interesting that, again, there's this parallel world out there, sadly, where people are just checking to make sure that things are being done properly. And if journals do not respond to concerns put out by the public, then often that particular person out there who's flagged the concern to the journal will also go to Retraction Watch and say, Journal ABC has this information about some unethical paper and I've done nothing about it and won't go back to me. So what we're going to do? And so there, at that point, Retraction Watch gets involved also to ask the journal, you've had this information now, this complaint for months, and looks like nothing's happening. Can you explain what you're doing about it? Which makes sense, because publishing houses should not be above everything. They actually have to be part of the whole structure. It's also something called pub peer. Well, pub peer is a bit interesting. It's almost a bunch of friends, and they're looking at various articles and see if things are a bit wrong. So often it's figures they look at and they find there's something wrong with the figure. It's been duplicated, or it's been adapted, or it's been just faked, or whatever. Or sometimes they were looking at a particular results graph and it looks very, very suspicious. And then they actually give their concerns to this public database, and then people will comment on that, and then and so on. And so what happens typically is that once someone has complained to pub peer about a particular figure and other people have commented on that, it doesn't take too long before the journal editor-in-chief gets to hear about this, and then they go look, and then they ask the journal author what's going on. And sometimes you get some very interesting denials about something that's obviously very badly wrong, that's been spotted by the research community. We have a bunch of resources in Elsevier, of course, and the Researcher Academy has all sorts of interesting things, learning modules and so on. And there you've got all sorts of advice about how you should make sure you have the correct authors, who are not authors, who are acknowledged individuals, information about plagiarism, information on how you respond if someone's plagiarized you, and what process you've got to do with that particular publisher or publishing house journal. There's information there about how you can reuse your own figures, often with need permission for them, or other people's figures as well, and the whole permissions process is there. And of course, all the various things to do with being an author, article structuring, and so on. So this was looking very, very clearly, I think, at this dark area of publishing called retractions. And at the same time, it is really sad that we actually have to do these sorts of trainings, these briefings, because it has become an integral part of the research landscape nowadays. And the talk I'm going to do shortly afterwards goes into a bit more detail, and that will be not about retractions per se, but about research ethics and publishing practice and so on. Again, it's these things which we as scientists, researchers, all have to be aware of and to use for our skills going forward, because once we know how to do things properly, then hopefully we won't get caught in the trap of being unethical because of ignorance. So at that point, we're now half an hour in. Last time I had this talk with you guys, there were lots and lots of questions, very interesting questions, which took I think more time than we had before. So hopefully, by having a bit more time now, we can answer any questions you've got coming from the slide deck. Of course, the slides here, the slide deck will be available afterwards, and this is also being recorded by your institute and it's going to be posted. So that's also useful. And so at that point, I just one more slide to do. That is, if you have any thoughts, you think about it later, here's my email address. It's no longer an Elsevier email address because now I'm Emeritus. I don't have an Elsevier email address. And of course, Vail's email address. So any questions, happy to answer them now. And then later on, there's the other event where we go into detail in other aspects of ethics and research.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anthony Newman. So in the Q&A session, Q&A panel, we have one question there. The question asks that sometimes the similarity check produces high similarity ratio because some sentences are repeated, and these sentences are written this way for the field of research. Is this something that can be overcome?
That's a very good question. What tends to happen is that sometimes unskilled editors get the similarity score as a number, and they don't check what text is overlapped. And so if it is, say, a method description, you only describe a method only so many different ways. And so it's normal not to include that in the similarity check. And in fact, you can, the editors can ask the journal manager to rerun the journal, the similarity check, excluding methodology and excluding bibliography, because that normally then makes it a bit clearer what's going on. Does that help?
Yeah, then there is another question. Is there a way to flag paper millers?
Yeah, paper mills are interesting. More of that in the next talk. But paper mills are interesting in that there's a whole industry out there making a living out of fake papers. Um, and it's a way to get your name linked to a particular published paper and hopefully get some citations. And if your research career needs to have a few publications, this might seem as a quick way to do that. But we have found it's like a sort of a constant war between publishing houses and paper mills, that there's all sorts of things that they've done and they get caught, and then his papers are pulled, and then there's other things done and then they're pulled and so on. So if someone emails you and tells you that you can actually be part of a paper, just pay us $500, I would say run away screaming. But at the same time, it might be very tempting for you. It's only $500, but at the same time is you might have been contacted there, or you might go on looking for this information. The publishing houses can read the dark web too, and we know exactly what's going on. And sometimes they're a bit slow, and we catch up a bit later. But at the same time, once it's out there, it's not always going to be out there. If it is actually, if you did pay to publish somewhere, and then the chance of being found out increases and increases and increases. And in fact, we use AI. We don't use open AI. We use closed AI to look at all the various things that are coming into us, to look for all sorts of paper mills and structures and processes. We do not publish how we do find these things out, and it's never out there in open AI. It's always closed AI on purpose to give us that level of control and confidentiality.
Okay. The next question asks that, can authors request their paper to be taken down without the retraction notice linked to it?
That's an interesting question. In the old days, maybe, but at the same time, authors asking for some sort of retraction without giving a reason, the editors are normally very suspicious. And so therefore you normally would need to give a reasonable reason for this. There have been cases where specifically the wrong dosing was given of a medicine, and so therefore that's not only a retraction, it's actually is a removal from that paper from the actual in the web. The simple reason that by leaving it up there, it becomes potentially dangerous and damaging for someone if they use that dosing. But at the same time, you've got to give a good reason for that. You can't just say, take it down. Because what we have found is that you have, particularly it's happened in places like Korea and the like, whereby they would publish, no, they would submit 4 different parallel articles to different journals. And then when the first one accepted it, the other 3, they would immediately ask for retractions. And so with no reason. The reason is that basically they were doing parallel submission and they can't have both papers up there. And so from that point of view, to take away a paper without giving a good explanation. Remember, if you can persuade the editor-in-chief that this is a good reason for it, you can also agree that the retraction text does state something that's much more neutral. It doesn't have to be sort of a blackening to you or whatever.
So please, use the Q&A panel or even the chat panel now to post your questions if you have any. I can perhaps ask one question that the retracted paper, they are still available publicly. So what we can say about citing such papers, like
That's sad. We do actually find that people do add references to papers that have been retracted, which means that they went to some paper, they read the article, they found the article interesting, they grabbed all of the references and then cut and pasted them into their own manuscript as potential references without opening them up to see were they of value, were they useful references. And so it is quite noticeable that there's still a trickle of citations every year to retracted papers year in, year out by lazy authors grabbing references and then not opening up and seeing what it's about. Yeah, sadly.
Okay, and another question is, what's the maximum allowed similarity percentage for a paper, including references?
It varies. It's up to the editor, but basically, as an author, if you are submitting something and it's one of a series of articles, there's going to be a natural overlap of text by about 15% because you like certain phrases when you write. It's just one of those things. If you have, say, a very long information, some review article or something, and you've got stacks and stacks of references, the amount of these articles which you're referencing, that's going to, that whole bibliography is going to be a huge overlap. So it's better not to have that included by the editor. In terms of what's a reasonable amount of novel material, I'd say you would be looking for less than 30% overlap with some other article somewhere else. And typically what happens is that the journal editor is given a printout, well, a screen actually. They can see what words are covered and which article they're coming from, and they can actually see why it is. And sometimes you can skim through it, and you can see very easily that, in fact, it looks like it's a quite large overlap from the score, but it is something like it's mentioning all sorts of interesting institutes. So that again is a duplication which is not relevant, or it's bibliography, or it's a method that's the same old method. You only describe a method so many different ways. And so it is important that when a paper is perhaps seen as perhaps too much overlap, but you as an author think that's not true, then you can ask, have they looked at this, this, and this? Because whatever. There are places out there where you can ask for your paper to be compared. And one's called, I think, Viper. It's useless. But the cross-check do have a service for authors, but it's quite expensive per paper. But in effect, make sure that you've got no problems with text which you've perhaps by mistake hijacked. Supposing you're writing something up and you see a particular bit of text, you think that's a nice way of phrasing that, and then you think I'll use that. And so what you do is you then build it into your draft paper, and with it as a reference. And then if there's 2 or 3 authors working on it, they forget which was their text, which was quoted from somewhere else. So whenever you add some text from another article which you're going to be referencing, please put speech marks around it so you know and your co-authors know this is not our text. We've got to rewrite it but still get the reference there, or we've got to leave the speech marks in so that the readers know it's not our text and we're just using that. I had that years ago. I was writing a white paper on research ethics, and I had a particular phrase I came across, and I thought, there's no way I can write a better way than doing that. It was the readers have the reasonable expectation of authenticity in reading articles. Wonderful. And so I thought, I can't rephrase that. So I just use speech marks and a reference because that just shows the reader this is a good way of phrasing it. You're muted.
Yeah, there is someone who would like to ask question on the mic. Ibrahim Voni, can you please turn on your mic and ask your question?
Yes. Thank you, Newman, for the useful insights you've shared. I just have two questions. They are quite linked. The first one is once a paper is retracted, ideally, if you cite it would mean that it's wrong. But it's also very possible that you are referring to the fact that it has been retracted. In this specific case, does it still constitute a bad practice to cite?
Yeah, that's a very good question. What you would do if you're going to be citing a retracted paper because it is retracted, you would give the reference to the retraction, which is then linked to the original article. That way it's very clear for the reader what you're trying to do.
Okay, so the retracted paper and the original published version are different?
The retracted paper is, firstly, the original paper has a banner across it in the HTML version saying retracted. No, sorry, the PDF version. And in the HTML version, it just says very clearly it's retracted. And then there's a separate article published in the journal, the separate DOI, which is the retraction notice. And that is hypertext linked back to the original article that has been retracted. Yeah.
Okay, so I know Scopus indexes things from Elsevier. So I was wondering if they still have within the Scopus database maybe some sort of an icon to be able to limit the citations associated with an author by excluding the retracted papers. Is this available?
I don't know, but it's a very good question. I don't know, well, if you know anything on this one, but it's a very good point. Here's Scopus. Is there a way you can actually filter out retracted papers?
Up to my knowledge, I don't think it's available, but we recommend or we actually welcome any recommendation. If you kindly send it to us by email, we'll share it with the product team.
It makes sense that going forwards, that makes a very sensible thing to do. It will make the Scopus database much more valuable.
Yeah. And just the last one, is it also possible to just block, a possible way to block the original article from being cited? Is it possible? It solves the problem.
No, it can't, because it's the record of science, and so therefore we can't interfere with that. That's why we don't take it away. It's up there, it's permanently up there, but it's now called retracted. And then we have the retraction notice, which is up there as well with the hypertext link. And that's all we can do to draw attention to the readers that this is something that's not a good paper. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That was satisfactory. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a couple of minutes left, so I'll try to go through as many questions as possible. There is a question that can we blocklist retracted papers authors because sometimes they just, publish it in changing surnames or something like this. This is the question. Or are there any mechanism to cross-check that someone is trying to publish the retracted content?
If someone tries to republish something, then that will flag in the various duplication processes that publishers have in place.
Okay.
If they change a few words here and there, basically they're taking a paper and fraudulently resubmitting it. So that's going to hopefully go badly wrong.
Okay. Is the similarity with the published ARXIV version of the paper excluded?
Yes. But what you have is that the pre-posting, the posting services like Archive, that's not a peer-reviewed site. It's actually a posting. So you as an author can post your article there, and then it's seen out there. And so what happens is that then down the road, when you submit your article, sorry, you submit your manuscript to a journal to become an article, then it sometimes gets a huge overlap with a previous posting, and so the editor has to ignore that, because that's one of the realities about posting as opposed to publishing. So then we had a few problems for a few years with bioRxiv being published by Cold Spring Harbor Lab, and the Journal of Biophysics published by Cold Spring Harbor Press, and some of the editors were getting a bit confused. But basically, there's no problem with by having your work up in a preprint server, because a preprint server does two things. Firstly, it tells the world you've done this, and so it establishes your link to you in that research field, and secondly, means that someone else can read this and start working on their work before you've actually gone through the peer review process and so on. So yeah, so preprint servers are very useful. At the same time, publishing in them is not, because they're not being published, they're being posted. That's a very important difference between publishing and posting.
Okay, because we have run out of the time, there was one more question, so maybe you can contact Dr. Newman through.
One more question. I'll do that. That's fine.
No, but now there is another one which has came up. Okay. Anyway, yeah. Let's take this one as the last question. If the editor, informed that one of your cited paper is retracted, how should one react to that? That you are trying to publish a paper and the editor tells that one of the paper is retracted. How should one react?
If you have submitted a paper and it has been retracted somewhere else, you can't submit it somewhere else, right? Secondly, if you have submitted a paper and you're being told it's going to be retracted, and then
the question is that the citation in the paper, like the reference in the paper is retracted, then what should one do?
Right. So if the author by mistake has been citing a paper that's been retracted, then it's a question of looking at what the text in your manuscript was that was relevant, and can you as an author find another piece of research from another person to replace that reference, and so your paper still remains as it is. It's just you have another reference to a real paper as opposed to one that's a bit dubious. Yeah.
Okay.
And you've got to then perhaps persuade the editor to give you the chance to go look and update the information. And you also have to thank the editor for pointing out that this particular article had been retracted. In effect, they're giving you a service.
Great. Okay, so I think, if there are any more questions, we also have another session with you, because we also have to switch from this Zoom session to the other one because of the technical reason. Yes. So thank you very much. Let's close this session. And then if you are also attending the next one, please join the other one. See you, those who are also in the other session there in the next meeting. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.